Hello everyone, my name's Dr. Paul Rose and this is my glamorous assistant. This is Marie with her sister Antoinette, Marie Antoinette. These are my two pet chickens and I'm going to use her today to talk to you about domestic fowl behaviour, husbandry and care. So I'm going to show you some of the finer points of the chicken, as it were. We're going to talk a bit about their origins. We're going to look at where they come from originally, and then we're going to consider her health and well-being so that when we keep them, which of course we keep chickens very frequently, we can keep them in the best possible health. So the domestic chicken has a surprisingly complex past. Molecular evidence from 2020, when the chicken's entire genome was sequenced, suggests that the chicken was domesticated around about 8,000 years ago. And these domestication events took place in areas around the world, predominantly in Asia, although the exact location of where the chicken was domesticated is controversial. Marie and her sister, Antoinette, are named after that unfortunate French queen who lost her head, partly because Mr. Fox is determined to do the same to them, but also because she is a French breed. She's a Marans, and Marans were developed in the southwest of France in the 1920s, and they were first imported into the UK in about 1930. And this is what we call a dual purpose breed. So she is good for both eggs and meat, although don't panic, sweetheart, you're not going to end up in the oven. And the Marans as a breed lays about 150 to 200 eggs a year. It's an old-fashioned breed, so it doesn't have an incredibly high productivity, but it is starting to kind of show some of the characteristics that we would see in more commercial breeds that lay a lot more eggs. And just in case you're wondering why she's doing this strange head flicking, she's not quite sure of herself being on camera. So that's kind of one of the behaviours you can look for in domestic fowl if they're a little bit unsure of their circumstances. But you can see she's looking around the place. She's not crowing for her friend and she's not trying to escape. So she's more inquisitive rather than stressed, aren't you, sweetheart? And I've got her favourite treat here, which is cheese. So just to kind of keep her happy, there we go. Bit of cheese, do you no harm. Not too much though, because you don't want them to end up with fatty livers. So what we'll look at now are the kind of points of anatomy of the domestic hen that you should consider. I haven't got any more. You'll have to wait. The points of anatomy of the domestic hen that you need to be aware of when you're going to do a health check. Now this is where this might go horribly wrong, because while she's quite happy to just sit here and be stroked, when I start juggling her around, she might get a little bit excited. So the first thing you can note about this chicken is it's got a beautiful red comb. That's the bit on the top of her head. And wattles, they're the bits hanging under, yes, that's my hand. They're the bits hanging under her chin. And this is indicative of her physiological state. Don't take it out on me. So if we have a chicken with a bright red comb and wattles, that sometimes tells us two things. One, that she's coming in to lay, because her physiology is being set up for laying eggs, and therefore she is going to be very, very productive in the near future. I really don't know what you want with my face. And also that she is the more dominant bird in the flock. Now I don't have a flock, I have two chickens, but if I did put them next to each other on the camera, you could see that one of their combs, so Antoinette's comb, is much paler than Marie's comb. So dominance can be indicated by the size and colour of the hen's comb and wattles. And if we compare that to the cockerel and what the cockerel's comb looks like, then his comb and wattles would obviously be much bigger and much more engorged with blood. So even though there isn't a cockerel around, the chickens themselves still have a domestic kind of pecking order, as it were, although that's not really the most appropriate biological phrase to use. There is a structure, a hierarchy in their flock. You should also note her eyes. An eye colour again can be indicative of the breed. So Morans should have this nice orangey coloured eye. And they should also have a pale bill as well, which is another characteristic of their breed quality. She has a bare face, and this is very, very similar to the original ancestor of the chicken, the red jungle fowl. So the more ancestral the breed, the more similar the features they have compared to their wild ancestors. And the domestic chicken does actually have a few characteristics that give you an idea of where it comes from. So Morans, and I'm going to pick her up now, so again this is where it might go wrong. As a breed standard, so just the same as you have in the domestic dog, so you have breed standards for chickens as well. She should have beautiful, stop kicking please. She should have beautiful white soles on her feet and white skin on her legs. That's indicative of this breed. Any yellow or orange colouring on her skin means that she's not a good quality Morans. But if we look at lots of breeds of domestic chicken, they do have orange or yellow pigment in their skin. Now, if we look at the wild ancestor of the domestic chicken, which is the red jungle fowl, we can see that that has predominantly grey skin. We have to look at another bird, the grey jungle fowl, which has yellow skin. So somewhere along the lines, there's been hybridization between the ancestral chickens from the red jungle fowl with wild grey jungle fowl, which have caused this orange or yellow coloration that we see in the skin of the domestic hen. So you should always check the extremities of the bird to make sure that her eyes are bright and shiny. These bare areas around the bird's face could be the spot for parasites to take hold of. So we make sure that there are no blood-sucking exoparasites attached to any of the skin there. You could also open her mouth and check inside, and it's quite easy to do that if you provide your chickens with a treat, and if they're really hand tame, you can get a look inside their mouth. We then would move down and look at her neck and her crop, and her crop is this sac just here, and it's full of food at the moment. She was obviously having her lunch just before I came and annoyed her. So if you feel the side of the chicken, let's just move her around in profile. We've got this bulgy bit just here, and that's the chicken's crop. And that's where she stores food before she actually digests it. So the chicken, like most birds, has two stomachs. It has the proventriculus, which is the glandular stomach, and it has the ventriculus, or the gizzard, which is the muscular stomach. And the gizzard is really important when it comes to what we provide these birds with when we keep them, their captive husbandry, because we must make sure that we provide them with grit. And if we don't provide them with grit, they can't break down all of the hard seeds and kernels, so corn, for example, that we give them. Yes, the gizzard is incredibly thickly walled muscular stomach, but the birds rely on grit, so small bits of stone that they ingest, which they can then go and use to help them with this mechanical digestion process. I'm going to give her another bit of cheese because she's being such a good girl. And that goes straight into her crop. So she hasn't digested that yet. There's no more, you'll have to wait. So she hasn't digested that yet. It's just sitting in this big sack, this big pouch. And that's an adaptation to keep her safe, because in the wild, if you are foraging in an area that might have high levels of predators, food resources are limited. So you're going to be all congregating in one place. That's a really easy thing for predators to spot. So the crop means you fill that crop really quickly with the food you're feeding on, or foraging and collecting, and then you can fly away, go and sit on a nice perch somewhere else, and consequently digest that food. So move it into the proventriculus and into the ventriculus, the glandular stomach and the muscular stomach for the mechanical breakdown of food when you're safely out of harm's way. And that links me to another thing that you should always do with your chickens if you keep them at home. You should always give them perches for roosting on of a night time. It's a natural behaviour for the chicken to perch, even if it's just a small bit off the ground, but to perch off the ground of a night time because that's how they feel more secure. So we've looked at her face and her wattles, we've looked at her crop, and I've shown you the skin colour of her legs. The other thing that you should always check on your bird as a visual appearance is the quality of her feathers. So what we have here is a bird with very, very good quality plumage. She's got all of her feathers nicely aligned and they've been very well oiled. We've got no damaged or broken feathers, and we don't have a dusty plumage which suggests that she's not dust bathing or preening herself properly. Dust bathing or preening is really, really important to removing exoparasites like feather lice and mites, which might otherwise impact on her overall physical health. These are blood-sucking parasites. You don't want your bird to carry a high load of them because that means she's going to be losing blood to those exoparasites. So dry, dusty, poor quality feathers that just don't feel right when you touch them, they're not sleek and smooth like she is, give you an idea that the bird isn't either dust bathing, maybe because it can't, maybe it hasn't been provided with those facilities, or it's stopped preening. One of the things that you should always check when it comes to looking at the bird's quality of its plumage is its preen gland. And the preen gland is found by parting the feathers along the bird's back, and you go to the base of the tail and you should be able to find a small area of kind of oily secretion, and that is the bird's preen gland. It's normally covered by 1 or 2 feathers, and if I can do this properly I will show you what it looks like, so just bear with me. I'll just try and keep her in one place. So I don't know how well that's coming out, but here where my end of my fingers are is her preen gland. And that preen gland is something that we always check to make sure that it's not blocked or swollen. It's not a centre for parasites. And when you touch it, it should feel slightly oily. And that's what the bird uses. She wipes her beak over that preen gland and then she wipes her beak through her feathers. And that's how she keeps her plumage nice and oiled. So we've looked at her comb and wattles, we've looked at her feather condition and her preen gland. I'm just going to give her another treat for letting me faff around so much. There we go. And we've also looked at how well oiled she can keep her feathers. So let's now look at some of her joints that gives us an idea of her movement. You should always check how well your bird can move its wings. The chicken has short, rounded wings, as befits its pheasant-like ancestors. It's not built for long-distance flying. It's built for short, explosive takeoff to get it away from danger. And some domestic breeds of chicken will fly in a similar way to their wild ancestors. So Marie and Antoinette can both fly. Not very high, I grant you, but they can still get themselves off the ground. So you need to make sure that any housing you have for your chickens is going to keep them safely inside and they're not going to fly out of it, particularly if that housing is open topped. So we're going to check the bird's wings, and what you should do is be able to move that wing in one fluid, very easy action, and you do that on both sides of the body, securing the bird against yourself as you do this. And here we can see her primary feathers, which are these long feathers on the edge of the wing here, and her secondary feathers, which are more rounded underneath. So the primary feathers in all flighted birds are long and they stretch out like fingers. And those finger-like appendages in some birds, like eagles for example, is what enables them to soar for very long distances using very little energy. On top of these primary and secondary feathers, we've got these feathers that fall on down over the top of them. And these are her covert feathers. And they actually keep all of the other feathers in place on the wing to give a very smooth leading edge to the wing, which allows the bird to fly. So thank you for that, Marie. You can have another piece of cheese for being such a good girl. We've looked at her wings, we can move them, we check underneath them as well as on top of them. So we make sure that in this lovely warm, slightly clammy, I dare say, armpits that all birds have, that we don't have any, again, parasites hiding in there. Now we're going to look at her leg joints and make sure her feet are in good condition as well. So pop the bird against yourself and you'll be able to see the bottom of her feet. You can see that there are no sores. You can see that the integrity of the foot, it's nice and smooth. Yes, she's covered in a bit of mud because she's scratching around, but there's no evidence of bumblefoot or any form of pathological change to the bottoms of her feet. Bumblefoot, if it's there, is best treated by changing the chicken's substrate, adding more perching, adding more opportunities for the chicken to be able to scratch around and exercise the soles of its feet. Bumblefoot is caused if the bird has access to the same uniform substrate day after day, which doesn't exercise the soles of its feet and increase blood flow. You should also make sure that there's no heat in any of the leg joints, and you should make sure that the chicken's gait is normal when she walks along. So again, sorry sweetheart, if I just hold you against my body, we can check for any movement of the legs. There's no signs of distress or injury, and the chicken is moving its legs in a normal manner. Thank you very much. You're a star pupil. Check her nails. Some species of chicken have extra toes on their feet. For example, Dorkings have an extra toe compared to many other breeds of poultry. And if you have a cockerel, again, if I just move her towards the camera, you check the back of her legs because that's where you would see a spur. Normally, females, domestic hens, don't have spurs, but they can grow them as they get older. And spurs can get trapped in the substrate or the wiring or the fencing around the enclosure. So always check for spurs. And they can be dangerous to other chickens as well, particularly if they have a bit of a falling out and they scrap with each other. So we've looked at her face, we've looked at her beak, we've looked at her eyes, we've looked at her leg joints and how she moves, we've checked her plumage, we've opened and closed her wings. The last thing to do is look at her overall body condition. And this is something really, really important to the poultry farmer because he wants to make sure his birds have enough energy for normal maintenance, so for normal homeostasis, as well as for producing eggs, or if she was a meat breed, for producing meat as well. All flighted birds, that's birds that can fly, have a keel. And this keel runs down the front of their chest, and attached to the keel, which is an extension of the bird's sternum, attached to that keel are the breast muscles, the pectoral muscles, which are used for flight. So I'm going to manhandle you again, Marie. So we pop the bird next to our chest and we can feel right down the middle here a line, and that line there is the bird's keel. It's got a bump where it starts here, and then we've got the muscles that sit either side of the keel, and it ends just at the end of the abdomen. And I hope you can see, if I turn it to the side and part her feathers somewhat, we've got some skin there, which is the evidence of the keel protruding from the breastbone. There we go. We don't check for body condition by squeezing the bone of the keel itself. We squeeze the sides to see how covered the sides are with muscle. We should feel the keel run down the centre, but the sides should be padded. If it's razor thin and there's no padding, the bird is in poor condition. And if you'd like to know more about how to score your birds based on the keel and breastbone, there's excellent scoring available on the DEFRA website. And this is something that is a really easy welfare assessment tool that you can do with all birds, not just a domestic hen. But it's important to consider her quality of body condition as she goes into lay, because she will lose condition very quickly, because it's a lot of effort, even in these older breeds that are not designed to lay eggs every day. they still put a lot of effort and energy into egg production. So they can lose body condition very quickly if they're not fed properly and if their housing is not warm and dry, which keeps them in good condition. So just to recap what we've done in this practical. We've talked about where the chicken comes from. It's a pheasant. It was domesticated about 8,000 years ago in some parts of Asia, a little bit contentious. Its ancestors are the red jungle fowl and the grey jungle fowl. And we know there's a mixture of these two wild birds in the domestic hen because of the colour of their skin in different breeds. We have looked at this breed specifically. So this is a Marans from France. It's an old breed, originated in the 1920s. And this feather patterning is called cuckoo. This kind of black, grey and white scribbly appearance is called cuckoo. And therefore we can work out the type of chicken we're looking at based not only on the description of her appearance, but also on her feather colour as well, the patterning on her feathers. We've looked at how to assess the bird's health based on its eyes, comb, wattles and bill. We have looked, yes, hello. We have looked at the bird's feet and the health of the bottom of her feet. We've opened and closed her wings and base of the tail. We've checked her preen gland, and this can sometimes take a bit of practice, but if you just start from the base of the tail and work yourselves along, there we go, you'll soon find it. And her preen gland is nice and oily, there's no discharge, so she's using it properly. If, like me, you spoil your chickens a bit, when they're in lay, try not to give them too many treats, because that can cause a physiological imbalance with the energy needed to produce an egg. They must have really good quality layers pellets that provide them with all of the energy they need for themselves and for egg production, but specifically make sure their balance of calcium and phosphorus in their food is balanced towards a higher calcium ratio than phosphorus. You don't want the bird filling herself up. You're getting a bit bored now, aren't you? You don't want the bird filling herself up on foods that do not contain lots of calcium, because then she will start stripping the calcium from her skeleton, using that for egg production and causing physiological metabolic problems. So make sure that when the bird is laying, it always has access to ad-lib good quality layers pellets or similar. That contains the right energy, the right fibre, fat, protein, and importantly, calcium requirements for keeping the bird healthy. So if you do have domestic hens at home, make sure you keep them safe from Mr. Fox. As I said at the start, Marie and Antoinette, they don't want to lose their heads. Mr. Fox is desperate to try that though. Please make sure that your coop is fox-proof. It's a legal obligation to make sure your birds, if they are housed in a back garden, are kept in fox-proof conditions. Please make sure that you check their physical appearance regularly, particularly if they're laying, and also make sure that each of your bird's personality matches what you would expect to see, because any changes in the bird's personality is also indicative of underlying health or well-being problems. The reason that I have chosen Marie for this practical rather than her sister is because she will sit still in one place, sell her soul for a pot of cheese, whereas her sister I would be chasing around the room just trying to get her to stay in one place. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I'm going to pop her back now in the garden. So from me and my feathery friend here, thank you for listening, and I hope you found that interesting.